Dear friends, the gospel today tells us about the second time that Jesus has foretold his passion and death. The first time was last week when we heard how immediately after Jesus had been recognized by Peter as the Messiah, Jesus began to tell them that the Messiah must suffer and die. And Peter said, "No way, Lord, not for you." And Jesus had to reprimand him for telling him what to do. He said, "You are not thinking the way God does." So we have a second time here. And again, the apostles, the disciples, just don't get it. There's a theme that runs through the Gospel of Mark, and indeed all the Gospels, that the disciples, the ones closest to Jesus, do not comprehend that part of his ministry, of his being sent by the Father, that he must be the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, as is mentioned in John's Gospel. This past week, we celebrated the feast, which is called the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. And the day afterwards is a memorial of the sorrowful lady, Mary, Mother of Sorrows. I would like to try to make a connection between those two memorials, feasts, and the two readings, the gospel readings that we've heard. And I'd like to start with explaining about the feast. The exaltation of the Holy Cross goes back to that time when St. Helen, the mother of the Emperor Constantine, discovered the relic, the remnant of the cross of Jesus. And there were miracles associated with this discovery that made everyone recognize, yes, this is part of the cross on which Jesus suffered and died. And so then a great church was built by Constantine over the place of Calvary, as it's called. And you go to Jerusalem today, and there is still these two churches, two different parts of a church. One is called the Martyrium, the other one, the Anastasis, or the resurrection over the tomb of Christ. So that began then a celebration of the cross of Christ, symbolizing his triumph over death, commemorating his suffering and death, but also the fact that he rose from the dead. And part of the celebration was a lifting up of the relic of the cross for the devotion of the people. And we have a remnant of that every Good Friday when we come up to venerate an image of the cross of Christ. So that's the exaltation of the cross, celebrating, as is written in the Gospel of John, that the Son of Man must be lifted up, not only on the cross, but then through his ascension into heaven, lifted up. If the Son of Man be lifted up, he will draw all men to himself, all people. So that's the celebration of the exaltation, which began in the Eastern churches, because that's where it all happened originally, but was also then became to the Western churches and is celebrated universally around the world. The day after in the West is a commemoration of the sorrows of Mary. And that's what I would like to speak about later on today. What does that say to us? Why is the Virgin Mary singled out as the one who most brings us closest to the heart of the mystery of Jesus? Okay. So let's look today, first of all, at the gospel. It says that Jesus left there. Now, what was not done, obviously, is the Feast of the Transfiguration is celebrated on August 6th. So that part of the gospel is not repeated on Sundays this year. But we have then, immediately following last week's episode, we have this second time that Jesus tries to teach his disciples what he is about. And it says he did not wish anyone to know about the journey. So this was different from everything beforehand, where he went deliberately went to each villages and taught in their synagogues and cured their sick and healed and cast out demons. Now it's all very quiet. His purpose, his focus is to help his disciples realize what is going to be happening and why it's so important. It's a lesson that he is very impassioned to impart. If he can't have his disciples know what he is about, then he will die and they will not understand him. So in the heart of Jesus, he really is trying to get them to understand this. But as the Gospels tell us over and over again, they just don't get it. And the reason for that being emphasized in the Gospels is that sometimes we just don't get it either. In fact, most of the time, we don't really comprehend what it means that Jesus suffered, and so also must we in obedience to the will. So it says he was teaching and telling them, the Son of Man is to be handed over to men. That's an important word there, handed over. Think about it. Judas handed him over to the Jewish authorities. The Jewish authorities handed him over to Pontius Pilate because they wanted Jesus to die the ignominious death of crucifixion, and they were not authorized to carry out that kind of a punishment, so they had to leave it to the Romans. And then it says that after interviewing Jesus, and Jesus refused to defend himself, the procurator, Pontius Pilate, handed him over to be crucified. So the series of being handed over, Jesus is passive. He is helpless. He is being acted upon. But nonetheless, we know that in fulfillment of the ancient prophecies, he is like being a lamb led to the slaughter. He is willingly allowing himself to be handed over because in his heart of hearts, he is handing himself over to do the will of the Father. He is fulfilling what was spoken of by the suffering servant Psalms that we've heard referenced in recently. So Jesus is being handed over. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him, question him. But the worst part comes then afterwards. They weren't listening to him. They were ignoring him or letting it go over their heads. But what were they doing? They were arguing about which of them was the greatest. Now, maybe I was thinking about that. Why at this point? Well, if you remember the story of the Transfiguration, 3 of them had been chosen to go up to the top of the mountain. Only 3 out of the 12. Aha, jealousy. Why those 3? And so maybe that was part of it. Well, I think it's sort of like, the traditional thing, but I think Mom loves me more than you.
It's mother's brothers.
Who's his favorite? Huh? And who's going to sit at his right hand and left when he comes into his glory? That was always the way they envisioned it. The earthly kingdom, and they were going to be on his right and left. And so this must have broken Jesus' heart. He was trying so hard to get his point across. They're not really listening. And so we realize then that at this point, the apostles of Jesus are very poor examples to all of us, correct? We're not supposed to act like them. We're supposed to listen to Jesus and try to absorb what he's teaching us, unlike the disciples before Pentecost, before the resurrection. Which brings me back then to what I was trying to do is when the church gives us the memorial of the sorrowful mother on the day after the exaltation of the cross, the church is holding her up then as someone whom we can follow, someone who is a great example to us and someone who makes the heart of Jesus rejoice because she gets it. Now, obviously, she had a great advantage in the fact that, as Catholics believe, she was conceived immaculate, meaning that sin, selfishness, did not dominate her life like it does with us so many times. This was not her doing. It was a gift from God, as we say, because of the foreseen merits of Jesus Christ, her Son. So God the Father gave her ahead of time the fruits of Jesus' victory over sin and death. Why did he do that? Because he wanted her to be the new Eve. Jesus was the new Adam, to show us what a person is. Adam means man. He is the perfect man to show us how to please God. And so God the Father wanted there to be a new Eve. Unlike the first Eve who failed the test, that Mary would stand by her Son, understand him, cooperate with him. And so that's the message, that she is for us then someone that we can follow. I'd like to close. Yes, there is a close to this homily. By looking at the 3 prayers set aside by the Church for that memorial of the sorrowful mother. They speak beautifully of who she is in relationship to the Church, to us. So the opening prayer is, O God, who willed that when your Son was lifted high on the cross, the exaltation, his mother should stand close by and share his sufferings. I think most of us know that beautiful hymn, at the cross, her station keeping, stood the mournful mother weeping, close to Jesus to the last. So she stood there, as John tells us in the gospel, standing there at the foot of the cross. And God willed that his mother should stand close by Jesus and share his suffering. We'll talk a little bit more about how did she share it. So because of that, grant that your church, us, participating with the Virgin Mary in the Passion of Christ, may merit a share in his resurrection, just as she did. So how did she share then in the sufferings of Christ? By doing exactly what he was doing. He was handing himself over to God, surrendering himself to the will of his Father. And she was there wholeheartedly joining with him, giving him up to God. What a painful sacrifice for a parent to have to give up a child. And this was no ordinary child. This was the eternal Son of God, her own beloved Son. But she was surrendering him to the will of God, handing him over as he was handing himself over. So that's the essence of what she was doing there. And it was bringing him, in the midst of his great sorrow, it must have been bringing him great joy to know that his mother was there, united with him totally, even as the rest were shouting at him, "Come down from that cross and we'll believe in you." The next prayer is the prayer that is said, prayer over the gifts at the beginning, just before the Eucharistic prayer. So receive, O merciful God, to the praise of your name, the prayers and sacrificial offerings which we bring to you as we venerate the Blessed Virgin Mary, whom you graciously gave to us as a most devoted mother when she stood by the cross of Jesus. Aha, another aspect of her standing near the cross. Not only was she united in Jesus' self-offering, but Jesus, we know, gave her to us as a mother, a spiritual mother, when he said to her, "Woman, Behold your son, speaking of the beloved disciple. And to the disciple, here is your mother. As St. Bernard put so beautifully, again, isn't that amazing that she was asked, in place of her own beloved son, the Son of God, to accept one of us, to accept all of us as her spiritual children. So from that moment on, she had a special role, and we acknowledge that role in the mystery of God's plan for us, that she also would be always there for us, to be a mother in the Spirit. And then finally, the prayer after communion. Having received the sacrament of eternal redemption, we humbly ask, O Lord, that honoring how the Blessed Virgin Mary suffered with her Son, we may count complete in ourselves, for the sake of the Church, what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Again, an amazing statement taken from the writings of St. Paul, who said, I endure all things, and I am enduring them as a sacrifice to complete what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. How could anything be lacking in the sufferings of Christ, in the offering? But it was the will of God that we should be able to join in the self-offering of Jesus, because we are his mystical body, and we also have a role to play. Jesus didn't need us. God doesn't need us, but he chooses to need us, to give us a share, not only in the blessings that come from the cross, but in the very act of offering ourselves in union with Christ for the sake of the Church, for the sake of the world. May God have mercy on us all. Amen.